Namaste. Psychoanalysis and philosophy. Hegel, Heidegger, Sri Aurobindo, towards an open model of the mind. Model of the mind is a core entity in the discourse of psychoanalysis. In the realm of philosophy, both in the East and the West, there have been many ideas related to an open model of the mind. This makes this topic an esoteric and a very interesting topic. And to discuss this topic, we have with us our psychoanalysis consultant, Mr. Himanshu Vaidya. Namaste, Mr. Vaidya.
Namaste.
Can we start with her first question? What is an open model of the mind and what is a closed model of the mind?
Uh, Model of the mind is very important in psychotherapy, and the importance is this: based on the model of the mind, we come to know how the mind operates. Based on that, we come to know how pathology develops, and based on that, we create our healing method. So there is a direct linkage between model of the mind, pathogenesis, and the healing approach. And therefore, the model of the mind is very important. Unfortunately, it is not easy to create a model of the mind, and therefore, very few psychoanalytic thinkers, or even very few non psychoanalytic thinkers, have tried to create a model of the mind. And in psychoanalysis, we have two models of the mind which are very popular: the model given by Freud and model given by Jung. If you look at both these models, you will see that both of them essentially deal with the individual and his family by and large. You don't have influences of society. You don't have the concept of reincarnation. You don't have concept of suprahuman forces. You don't have concept of the environment individual linkage, the history individual linkage, the culture individual linkage, and so on. And therefore, this brings us to this whole idea of what is a closed model of the mind and what is an open model of the mind. Ideally, a closed model of the mind literally would mean it does not have any place for the other. It is completely self sufficient within the individual himself. No such model of the mind exists because in every model of the mind, no matter how closed or narrow, we still have the person and the family, at least the immediate surroundings. And therefore, when we say closed model of the mind, it's a relative term. It is not 100% closed model of the mind where you have only the individual and no surroundings. It is just that the surroundings are inadequately present in the model of the mind. So let us start here that uh, when we say closed model of the mind, we are talking of a model of the mind which is concerned only with the individual and the immediate family, most importantly, the mother and the father, and occasionally siblings come in. So this is the closed model of the mind approach that you find in psychoanalysis. Freud's model you can call a closed model of the mind. Others like Klein and Kohut have not given a model of the mind, but they have said certain things about the functioning of the mind, and what they have said is largely in the spirit of a closed model of the mind. When we come to Jung, we talk about the collective unconscious, which is the historical heritage of the race. In that sense, there is a transpersonal element, and this transpersonal element is coming from the genes, not coming from the outside. So in Jung's model of the mind also, you have the self, the collective unconscious, the personal unconscious, the conscious, and outside in the conscious is the ego, and outside of the conscious is the environment. But we don't go into details of the environment, neither in the social area, cultural area, spiritual area, or political area. in great depth with some precision as to how that bears upon the model of the mind. And therefore, you can call Jung's model of the mind as a semi-closed model of the mind because he does factor in the transpersonal element coming through the collective unconscious, and he also talks about synchronicity as though there is some higher order of law which is above our ordinary laws of causality. So there is a transpersonal element from the inside to the collective unconscious and a transpersonal element from the outside to synchronicity. So those two elements are definitely there. And in his dream analysis, he also talks about the cultural interpretation of the dream. That brings in at least one element of culture of the environment in a major way into psychoanalysis, although not strictly in the model of the mind, but definitely in one area of psychis theory of the dream analysis. So in that sense, you can talk about Jung's model of the mind as a semi-closed model of the mind. And then we have very open models of the mind. One good example would be Sri Aurobindo's model of the mind, which talks about transpersonal elements of reincarnation, of the cultural influence on the person, on the uh, social influence on the person, on the spiritual evolution which is on earth, and the influence on the person according to that plan of a spirit of the age. So these elements are far more uh, pronounced in Sri Aurobindo's model of the mind, which are transpersonal in nature and go beyond the person and his immediate family. And therefore, that can be one open model of the mind. And in last few years, we see a movement from a closed model of the mind to the open model of the mind because we realize that the outside has far more to contribute to the inside than what we have usually uh, presumed. And therefore, there are a number of trends in psychoanalysis and outside, in philosophy, in spirituality, in other areas, even in anthropology, which tell us that it is possibly time to expand the horizons of the way we theorize about the model of the mind and to truly move to a biopsychosocial model, which we pay lip service to, but we don't really walk the talk. And therefore, I think the time has come to really revisit the way we create models of the mind and move from a closed model of the mind approach to an open model of the mind.
How does Hegel link an individual's mind to a greater system?
As I said, this closed model of the mind approach and the open model of the mind approach is not something unique to psychoanalysis. You find it in all areas which deal with model of the mind. So when we talk of philosophy, in philosophy also people create model of the mind. When we talk of cognitive sciences, they also create a model of the mind. And when we talk of spirituality, they also have their own models of the mind. And therefore, when we come to philosophy, we see two broad approaches. The approach of Descartes and more profoundly elaborated by Immanuel Kant is more towards a closed model of the mind. So when Descartes says, I think, therefore I am, it's all about the inside, the almost a seeming self-sufficiency of the individual with little the object of thought has to contribute to it. There's an extreme version in philosophy of a closed model of the mind. And then we have a very profound thinking about the mind by Immanuel Kant, where there is a subject and an object, and there is no way there can be any linkage between the two except through the process of knowing and the mode of engagement which happens between the two. There is no superarching organic unity which binds the two in any purpose or under any scientific law. So when the two are not bound together in an overarching system, either through a scientific law or through a philosophical or spiritual purpose, it creates a very closed model of the mind. Naturally, it leads to alienation, because then you have the subject and object as two disjointed entities with nothing to do with each other except the scientific laws of transaction between them. Contrast to that, you have the approach of Hegel and Heidegger, where the outside is factored in a major way, and the outside has a major influence on the inside. And these are, in the philosophical area, examples of more open model of the mind. In Hegel, the open model of the mind rests upon five basic tenets. The first is the concept of the spirit of the age, the Zeitgeist. And this spirit of the age influences the way we think. And therefore, the way the mind is created and the way the mind operates is not in isolated independence. It is substantially influenced by the spirit of the age. When it is this spirit of the age which brings in the transpersonal element into the functioning of the mind. It also brings in the political, social, and cultural element into the functioning of the mind. The second is the whole concept of dialectic. That the way the mind operates is through a dialectic process. And in the dialectic process, something comes from outside, something from inside, or there are two things from inside which are transcended into a synthesis. And one can draw a parallel here in between the dialectic process of Hegel and Jung's concept of the transcendental function. That the transcendental function, the way it operates in Jung, is one psychological example of the dialectic process. That the two opposites are brought together and the tension is resolved by moving, graduating to a third position, which is free and above the two which were in conflict. And the resolution, therefore, is a third position, which is a transcendent position. It is either a position of synthesis, it is either a position of profound acceptance, or a position of liberation. But in all the three instances, it's a transcendent position. And this is something you have to realize, that the transcendent position is not a homogeneous one position. There are a range of positions that can be called transcendent positions. So it's a category, not one element. But this is a way, it's a dialectic process without doubt. It's a Hegel's dialectic, inside in the mind operating. The third element where Hegel's concept comes in is of the dyad balancing. That when there are two people interacting and one person does something, there's a tendency in the other to do something to balance out the situation. So if somebody is very, very happy, and exuberant and almost manic, the other person tries to bring in prudence and establish some sort of balance there in that dyad. It's a kind of a dyadic balance, a dyadic homeostasis, which naturally we try to bring about. And therefore, the state of the other is influencing the way our mind works. Then we have the Hegel's concept of the absolute. And the absolute is, it's almost like Hegel is a philosopher of purpose, but not clearly a theistic philosopher. He stops 2 steps away from being a theist. It's almost like a Buddhist philosopher with a purpose. And Hegel there talks of the absolute, that there is some plan for this world, and the absolute spirit is realizing itself through human history. And in that human history, we all are components of that giant process. And the way our minds function also has a congruence with the way the broad plan is approaching. So the absolute has its own plan for realization on the terrestrial plane, and that is achieved through a series of spirits of the age. And the spirit of the age, whatever is concurrent, whatever is active, has a great influence on the way people living in that particular time think about things. And last is the real is rational. This again brings about a common tendency in the human mind to appreciate that whatever affair, state of affairs is, no matter how non-ideal, the state of affairs is a strong explanation. And therefore, there is a tendency to somehow adjust to this state of affairs outside. Because one thinks automatically almost that the state of affairs is what it is because given an interplay of forces at work, nothing else could have been possible. Now, this is criticized as a philosophy of pessimism and status quo, and there is some truth to it, but there is definitely an element of adjustment to reality when Hegel says the real is rational. Even if we don't accept it totally, there is no doubt that most of us unconsciously adapt to the real as it is without striving for the ideal in the outer world. So there is an effect on the mind, on the very brute force of circumstances as they are. So these are the five elements in Hegel which bring about a transpersonal element, a transcendental philosophical purposive element of the absolute, and then certain cultural influences, social influences, dyadic influences, the process of dialectic in the mind. And these are some of the ways in which Hegel talks about the way the human mind operates and the way its concerns are and should be, and also the purpose of existence. And this, if you coalesce everything into a model of the mind, you will see it would coalesce into an open model of the mind, although Hegel has not created anything as such. But all that he has said about the human mind and human consciousness broadly fall under the ambit of a very open model of the mind.
Is Heidegger's concept of being and time also an open model of the mind?
Yes, it is. Because Heidegger takes off in one way when he talks about the mind from Immanuel Kant, and for Kant, space and time were very important. Whereas for Heidegger, it is time which is more important than space. And what Heidegger says is that there is nothing like pure being, but being actually is a being in time. There is no way we can remain unconcerned or uninfluenced by the spirit of the age in which we live. So in being and time, when he talks of time, it's not very different from the spirit of the age. But spirit of the age, not in the sense of a larger design, but in the sense of the outside that we find ourselves in. So uh, Heidegger is not a philosopher of purpose like Hegel is. For Heidegger, the human condition is a condition of proneness without a purpose. For Hegel, the human condition is a condition of being a constituent towards a purpose. Both are very different when it comes to the element of design in reality and the element of contingency, disjointedness, and the absurdity in reality. But Heidegger definitely is more toward the open model of the mind because for him, the human mind is largely shaped and works in the context of the environment in which he finds himself. And this environment has very strong elements of politics, history, and technology. So the mind that grows up in the era of internet and the mind that grows up in the era of radio and the mind that grows up in the era of television are differently growing up. And there are areas of those minds which are different because of the environment. You can talk about a radio generation, a TV generation, and an internet generation. So there is a difference in people because of the outside they saw growing up. And this also brings us to the element of what Heidegger stresses, the alienation from nature. Because there is a very profound influence on the way the mind develops when the mind grows up amidst nature, along with trees and animals, and the mind which grows up in concrete societies. And I call it the reinforced cement concrete society, the RCC humanity. And the RCC humanity is very different from the natural humanity. And I think we now can easily make out the difference between a very big chunk of humanity which has grown up in the RCC society, comparing them with those who are still in communion with nature. So Heidegger definitely is a philosopher on the open model of the mind side, but his openness is very different from Hegel's openness or Sri Aurobindo's openness.
Are the two approaches of Hegel and Heidegger the same or different?
They are same in the sense both are towards an open model of the mind. Both of them believe in a very radical influence of the environment on the mind. Both of them believe there is a great sense of purpose that the mind has towards the environment. This is the common part of it. Both of them also believe it's very difficult, almost impossible to be independent of the era in which you are living. In the sense, the mind cannot escape getting colored by the times in which we live. Those four are commonalities between the two. The differences are Hegel is a philosopher of purpose, while Heidegger is a philosopher of absurdity and thrownness. Hegel is a classical scholastic philosopher. Heidegger is a very classical existential philosopher. So for Hegel, there is a purpose to universe. There is a purpose to human life. There is a rationale behind what exists. For there is a direction to history. That there is a constant movement of history towards the goal that it has for itself. For Heidegger, there is no purpose as such of the universe that he can see. There is uh, no fact to the point that an individual is a constituent of a giant process of history. For him, the flow of history is not linear. It's not that we are constantly moving towards something better. For him, there is no point in subjugating the individual to the flow of history or to the larger authority of any ideology. And for him, unlike Hegel, who claims the absolute is knowable, for Heidegger, the starting point is he accepts the defeat that there is no way we can be certain about knowing the real existence or reality as it is. And therefore, the whole focus is on descriptive phenomenology. Because a defeat is accepted, that in an ontological sense, we accept defeat, according to Heidegger. that the ultimate reality may not be knowable, or we may not be capable to know it, or it may not be even useful to know it beyond the point. But what is important is we are certain about where we find ourselves in, about what we find ourselves in, and where is the whole thing going, and what can we do about it. And therefore, without going into the ultimate nature of reality or the ultimate purpose of reality, his focus essentially on describing our existence as it is and what can be done about it. And therefore, uh, he is not a philosopher of purpose, he is not a philosopher of uh, ontology, he is not a philosopher of allowing the individual to be subjugated to a greater purpose, although for a short period of time when he uh, was sympathetic or appreciative of the Nazi movement, he did uh, take this position for a short period of time, but in most cases, for much of his career, he was not for an individual being subjugated to an ideology. It was the whole pivot was authenticity. That if the authentic desire wants you to subscribe to an ideology and consume yourself for it, it is a free choice. But this is not a kind of a policy for society. And for Heidegger, the environment, the openness, the disclosures are important. But he does not see uh, a kind of a graduated evolvement or graduated unfolding of social reality one after the other in the process of human history. So his openness was slightly different, but when we bring the two in psychoanalysis, both of them definitely fall under the approach to the open model of the mind.
How does Sri Aurobindo conceptualize the model of the mind?
I think his model of the mind is a very good example of an open model of the mind. The way he conceptualizes is one, philosophically he conceptualizes of a spiritual evolution. So there is a grand design like Hegel, but being a theistic philosopher, Sri Aurobindo brings in the element of God, he brings in the element of suprahuman souls and spirits, he brings into uh, the model suprahuman forces, he brings in the element of the soul in evolution, soul outside of evolution, and one immanent reality. All of this make his model of the mind very unique. That it is an open model of the mind, it involves transpersonal elements, it involves God and grace, it involves suprahuman spirits, it involves suprahuman laws, and it involves a design of the world moving towards a goal of a superman. And this is a kind of a spiritual version of the Titan Superman that Nietzsche was talking about. But it is not a Superman of Nietzsche. Nietzsche's Superman is a Titanic Superman, something more than a man, but we never know on which side. And we don't see compassion, delicacy, truthfulness, purity, spirituality as virtues of that Superman. But here we do see that those virtues, and we see that being realized through a spiritual process. It is not through a reckless, passionate process. And this is seen as a goal for the whole race, not for a few individuals. So Sri Aurobindo's model of the mind has uh, the transpersonal elements, the elements of God, grace, suprahuman entities, and this whole purpose of uh, human history according to a plan of spiritual evolution towards Superman. And in the context of it, what to do and how to live. They are very distinct from both Hegel as well as Heidegger.
Is his approach very different from Hegel and Heidegger?
Yeah, so the only common point between the three is all the three recognize that the outside is very important, and there is nothing like a pure model of the mind where the mind is almost independent of the outside. That is one. Two, both of them, all the three of them believe in uh, the environment being very important. Between uh, Hegel and Sri Aurobindo, the difference is about the theistic philosopher and the semi-theistic philosopher. And the major difference between the three is this. Apart from the fact that all the three believe in the open model of the mind, all the three believe in the spirit of the age and its influence on the human model of human mind. Apart from this, there are all the differences. First is philosophically, Sri Aurobindo is into theistic philosophy, into a spiritual evolution of earth, into a plan already being there, into a movement of history which is directional. He calls it spiral, not linear, but the spiral has an upward moving direction on an average. And the greatest difference is that after you spell out this philosophy, how do you live? Once you spell out this philosophy, how do you live? In case of Heidegger, the living is very, very individual, and it essentially goes into authentic living. In this authentic living is not necessarily a spiritual living, because when you accept yourself, the authentic self part of yourself, it also has difficult parts of you. And there is no commandment that you should make ideal a guiding point and constantly try to get out of the non-ideal parts of yourself, which is a case when we look at Sri Aurobindo's philosophy. So there, the pursuit of the ideal is absolute. There is no question of accepting one's authentic self with the dark parts as it is. So the self-acceptance is not an ideal, self-transformation is an ideal. Whereas in Heidegger, self-acceptance does become a very important part of living. And to put it into his words, uh, authentic, being authentic also means accepting the inauthenticity of oneself. That a part of oneself will continue to be inauthentic, or the authenticity itself may have darker parts of our being. So, after spelling out the philosophy, when it comes to everyday living, there is a world of difference between the way Sri Aurobindo would prescribe it, which is a very spiritual living based upon self-transformation. In the self-transformation is based upon faith and in the belief of God and grace, compared to Hegel and Heidegger, where these elements are completely missing. They are very secular philosophies, so to speak. So on this point of the belief in God, transpersonal beings, suprahuman entities, spirits, grace, and complete dedication and devotion to the spiritual evolution plan, and a constant rigorous focus on self-transformation in the light of the ideal. On all those areas, when it comes to everyday living, Sri Aurobindo's vision and what he practiced in his ashram at Pondicherry are very different from what Hegel or Heidegger would say.
We have discussed these three models by the philosophers, two from the West and one from the East. Now we come to how we can relate it to psychoanalysis. So, in that sense, why do you think psychoanalysis needs to engage with these three models of the mind?
Because we realize over the last 50 years that the outside is far more important than we have believed it to be. Take three examples. Take the example of hysteria. Uh, Look at the number of people who had hysteria out of 100. 150 years back, and look at it today. In 150 years, it is unlikely that evolution would have changed our neurological system. What has changed essentially is the outside. And because the outside in the society has changed, we today have far lesser patients of hysteria than we used to. Take the second example of what Kohut used to say almost 35, 40 years back, the concept of the guilty man and the tragic man. So 30, 40 years back, Kohut himself used to say that during Freud's time, the classical patient was a repressed patient, that he had enormous amounts of desires, mostly sexual or aggressive, and they were bottled up inside of him. So there was a drive and there was a control, and the drive was frustrated. So it was essentially a drive frustration model. And though that was the classical patient, what Wood used to call the guilty man, that there is huge amount of drive and the man is guilty and frustrated because of the drive being controlled. And then Kohut says the second category of patients which Kohut worked with largely towards the end of his, towards the later part of his career is what he calls the tragic man. That you have people suffering from early life abandonment or too few people in their lives. This man is a lonely man. And this man is a man where the core difficulty is not that desires are bottled up. The core difficulty is that the good objects are not adequately internalized. And he is a man with defect rather than deficit. The self has not been very strongly formed. Healthy self has not formed because of a list of factors, he says, but essential point is that there is a vacuum, a scarcity of adequate number of good objects around the person. We essentially are talking about a lonely abandoned man. And we see how this has developed now almost into a global pandemic, the pandemic of loneliness. UK and Japan already have a minister for loneliness, and it's a global pandemic affecting most of us. I believe there are very few people today in this world who don't feel loneliness in some degree or the other. And it has been a pandemic for last more than 25 years, and WHO is practically sleeping over it. The whole point is the third example of narcissism. When we look at various types of narcissistic people, various positions of narcissism, we find early life scarcity of good objects is a very popular, not popular, very pervasive cause of narcissistic people. We see entire societies having people with predominant majority of narcissistic people. It's almost like narcissism is now a part of the human condition. And this, every third person you see is a narcissistic person. Narcissism, which used to be a one-off case, now is a part of a very common human condition. And this has to do with uh, the way people are brought up. There is an old saying, it takes a village to bring up a child. And unfortunately, we don't even have a populated enough family, live alone a village. And this is creating very different kind of individuals because of the outside change. And many of the personality disorders we are dealing with today have their roots in inadequate number of good people around in early childhood. And therefore, these three are examples of how the outside is so important. Very clearly in terms of three pathologies or three types of patients, three categories of patients we used to or we do find. Then come to
Mr.
theory.
Vaidya, can I ask a question pertaining to this?
Okay.
I mean, the three kinds of, I mean, the issues which have changed because of the outside in the last 150 years, as you said. Like as you said, hysteria cases have gone down. Can you say that, I mean, from the observation of the recent times, that the depression cases have gone up as compared to they were 100, 150 years
Very much so.
before?
Very much so. In fact, not only depression cases have gone up, in fact, a very large number of psychosomatic sicknesses because of psychological problems has gone up. And many of the so-called lifestyle diseases or chronic diseases we talk about have a very strong psychosomatic component to it. And this has gone up because of the way the society has disintegrated, or the society has uh, not being social enough in a sense. And there is a very clear linkage in some studies between loneliness and blood pressure. And now people are drawing connections between loneliness and many other sicknesses, where the psychosomatic, the psychological component is a strong element in a multifactorial situation leading to a sickness. India today is a kind of a depression capital. If you just look at the road, just stop at a crossing or a crossroads when the signal is on and just take a look at everyone's face. 9 out of 10 people seem angry. You will hardly ever find a smiling, pleasant face on the road. And this was not the case 25, 20 years back. It is not something genetic. We have evolved into a depressed country. And the large component there is social reality, social situations which are leading to that depressive state. In a way, we have got the worst of all the worlds in this process of globalized development and this process of reckless urbanization. So there is definitely a case for the uh, outside being largely responsible for rising depression, not only in India, across the world. The stress is too much, the demands are too much, desires created by corporate communication is creating unbearable frustration. And nobody has the courage to stand up to these corporates and ask them not to do this communication. So this whole element of ethics in corporate communication has gone out of the window. And this whole concept, this flawed concept of a perfect individual, by saying that let the corporates do what they want to do, you just don't buy if you don't want to or you cannot afford. This presupposes a perfect control over one's desire, which is a completely hypothetical situation. This presupposes a complete control over the stimulus, which is completely an artificial pretext, of artificial reason. It's not true. I mean, the way we are exposed to stimulus and the way we are exposed to communication, beyond the point we cannot control, it goes into the unconscious and creates desire and frustration. So this whole idea of uh, complete freedom and not bringing any control from the outside. In India, we have this very important debate of addiction, alcohol prohibition. That in many states, uh, men from low income community spend most of their earnings in liquor, in addiction, and they come home drunk and beat up their family members. And then women and children, they come on the streets asking the government to ban alcohol, and the prohibition law is announced. And then the advocates of free speech come in and they say this is against freedom and liberty. Man is rational enough to choose whether to go for alcohol or not. It's completely a rubbish argument. It presupposes a perfect control over one's unconscious, which is never the case. We all need assistance from outside in the shape of do's and don'ts, in the shape of excess, and in the shape of prohibition, in the shape of inhibition, and in the shape of fear of law to help us control our own unconscious. So, this is where it comes to that we need to factor in the outside because the outside has a very great influence on the inside, and the influence has of two parts. One, in creating the inside itself in the first formative years of life, and second, in the way the inside can operate or not operate in the context of the outside. Conceptually, uh, in a faint way, in a hazy way, concepts are coming into psychoanalysis from many directions towards this. Take the example of Lacan's big other. The big other essentially talks about outside. And although Lacan does not create a very exhaustive model of the mind, but there's definitely an element of going towards it the way he describes the mind functioning in terms of registers and in terms of discourses and in terms of the influence of the big other. So his concept of the big other is definitely an element which requires further deconstruction in terms of social, cultural, economic, political entities, the entity of history. One, two, the infusion of uh, the passing on through genes of intergenerational material. Three, this whole flow from history, mythology, and culture. And if you believe the whole spiritual dimension of paranormal, parapsychology, and spiritual entities. So there are even Kohut's concept of the arc of tension. The arc of tension is a social construct. We have uh, put it in the sense of the working of the mind in society, but we have not put it in the way the mind got created in the first place. So I think from a variety of sources, and I think it started off with Adler, who tried to bring in the whole element of economic class and some influence of Marx and Marxism. And there are many others who bring in this whole element of social psychology or something social or environmental or historical or transgenerational, intergenerational or transpersonal or para into the model of the mind. And I think this hazy things coming from many directions slowly will converge over a period of time into a more open model of the mind.
In that sense, you feel that psychoanalysis needs to engage with these concepts of the model of the mind given by the Eastern and the Western philosophers?
I think so. On one hand, a movement towards the open model of the mind in a secular sense. In another sense, uh, those who are in psychoanalysis and are believers, they can go for a more spiritual open model of the mind. And the third is to bring in the epistemology from philosophy into psychoanalysis to deconstruct the critical psychoanalytic processes, be it Oedipus or the split or the self formation. And fourth is to see the socio-cultural influence. It is a very important influence in the way the mind develops. Because many of the options that open up to the mind and the choices exercised in early formative years and even later early childhood years or late childhood years have a great deal of the outside influence, the influence of the big other. So I think if we want psychoanalysis to create a model of the mind which can travel beyond psychoanalysis, beyond pathology, into other parts of humanities also, you will have to factor in increasing amount of the outside in the construction of model of the mind itself.
Uh, Now we come to our last question, which pertains to your own heat model of the mind. Would you call that model of the mind an open model of the mind?
Yes, it is an open model of the mind, and I think going forward, it will become even a more open model of the mind. As it is open in a spiritual sense. It is open in the sense of reincarnation. Uh, it is open in the sense of parapsychology and suprahuman spiritual entities. It is open in the sense of intergenerational transmission. It is open in the sense of being open to environment, but where it requires development is in deconstructing the environment and very clearly identifying social, cultural, economic, political, technological, environmental, very specific entities which have a bearing on the construction of the mind in early childhood and later on the operation of the mind in the life process.
Uh, okay, Himanshuji, I think our discussion has been very fruitful and we've covered a very important topic today, moving towards an open model of the mind. Uh, we shall continue with more such videos.
Sure.
Meanwhile, thank you so much. Do write to us at hvindia@gmail.com. Namaste.
Namaste.